In a luxurious shopping mall in Atlanta, an innocent 11-year-old boy was cornered and humiliated by a group of ruthless teenagers. No one lifted a finger until an unexpected figure emerged from the shadows. What happened next left everyone speechless. Are you ready to uncover the truth? Subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from. The Lenox Square Mall buzzed that afternoon, with lights shining on the storefronts and the constant murmur of footsteps and background music. Eli walked alongside his mother, holding a small bag with his new sneakers. His eyes scanned the hallways with a mix of curiosity and caution. At 11 years old, he was a slim African-American boy with restrained movements, wearing a red cap snugly on his head. His mother had given it to him for his last birthday, and since then, he rarely took it off. Eli was a reserved boy whose face would light up when sharing his exciting adventures in his favorite video game with his mother. His mother, about 35 years old, was casually dressed in jeans and a blouse. With a bag in one hand and her phone in the other, work kept her busy, though she always managed to pay attention to her son, responding with questions that encouraged him to keep talking. Although work kept her busy, every outing with Eli was a special moment for her. In front of a large window, Eli adjusted his red cap as the afternoon light bathed the scene. His mother furrowed her brow as she checked her phone, revealing an unusual concern. "Mom, is everything okay?" Eli asked, tilting his head slightly. His mother let out a slight sigh and smiled at him, but there was a hint of distraction in her expression. "Yes, sweetie. I just need to take care of something for work. I won't be long." Eli glanced at the digital clock at the entrance, wondering how long his mother would take. While he waited, Eli felt a cold stare piercing him from the shadows of a corner. Amid the comings and goings of people, a pair of eyes watched him with an unsettling intensity, as if someone were measuring each of his movements. For a moment, the bustle of the mall seemed to fade, leaving only the sensation of a latent danger. In the central plaza of Lenox Square, mother and son enjoyed a tender moment of attention and closeness. Her soft voice and Eli's laughter filled the air as she played with Eli's hair. They were looking for the perfect shoes for the new school year. In each store, Eli explored with curiosity, while his mother pointed out the models that combined comfort and style, and he tried them on with enthusiasm. After browsing several stores and sharing school anecdotes, they selected the ideal sneakers and headed to the food court. Sitting at a quiet table, amid murmurs and smiles, they discussed the menu and celebrated the simple pleasure of sharing a moment together. After leaving the last store, a subtle sense of anticipation filled the air. Each step seemed to announce that, despite the calm, surprises were still ahead. However, while they laughed and talked, Eli noticed something strange. In the shadows of a nearby hallway, a figure appeared to be watching them intently. For a moment, the mall's murmur became a distant echo, and a chill ran down his spine, as if that silent observer were foretelling that the calm was about to be shattered. The atmosphere in the shopping area became tense the moment Eli's mother answered a call after paying for the sneakers. Her face reflected worry and determination, and her voice sounded urgent. Even some passers-by noticed the change in her expression as the conversation sped up. In a firm voice, she explained the situation on the other end of the line, and, when it ended, she turned to Eli. Confidently, she instructed him to stay in the food court and wait for her return, trusting that he could stay calm. Eli nodded resolutely, recalling the times his mother had entrusted him with small responsibilities. However, as the minutes passed, a surge of autonomy overwhelmed him. Determined, Eli decided to leave the food court and head to the parking lot to find the family car. With measured steps, he slipped through the hallways filled with shoppers, confident that he could complete the task he knew by heart. 3 teenagers entered the mall with a carefree attitude, laughing and pushing each other openly. Their behavior and confident voices sharply contrasted with the formality of the place, immediately drawing the attention of those passing by. Inside a clothing store, they stopped in front of a display window with a dark-skinned mannequin. Without reservation, they began making derogatory comments and laughing, while the discomfort of employees and customers became evident. After leaving the store, they headed to the food court. There, in front of an African-American family sharing their lunch, they started muttering aggressive and prejudiced remarks, heightening the tension in the air with every laugh and mockery. Slowly, the atmosphere in the food court became uncomfortable. Concerned looks were exchanged, and a security guard watched closely, sensing that this disdainful behavior would soon have consequences. At that precise moment, when the atmosphere had already become unbearably tense, a customer with a firm expression stood up and began slowly walking toward the group. His gaze, filled with determination and disapproval, silenced the laughter and mockery. For a brief second, the murmur of the food court stopped, as if time had frozen, revealing that tolerance had reached its limit. The employee of a store, with an expressionless face, watched the group of teenagers advance down the hallway. He remembered previous incidents, and each mocking laugh increased his unease, as he silently calculated that the situation could worsen. In a rarely trafficked corner, one of the teenagers took out his phone and started recording. With an arrogant gesture, he focused on an African-American woman walking with her daughter, while making disparaging remarks to ridicule them. The recording revealed the cruelty of his words and the growing discomfort of those present. Shortly after, the group encountered a 35-year-old African-American man. In an almost imperceptible exchange, their voices rose in whispers filled with insults. The teenagers made hostile comments while the man, visibly surprised, tried to maintain composure. The tension was palpable among those present, as if the atmosphere were about to explode. While the phone continued capturing the disrespectful actions, the distant store employee, with a watchful gaze, sensed that the situation was escalating. The customers, increasingly attentive, showed the concern on their faces that the instability could explode at any moment. Amid the growing hostility, a shout was heard, "Enough already!" The teenagers immediately turned, searching for the source of the voice that challenged their behavior. However, among the dozens of faces looking at them disapprovingly, they couldn't identify who that shout belonged to. The sound quickly dissipated, leaving only the tension in the air. The atmosphere grew more tense when, without warning, one of the teenagers deliberately stepped into the path of the 35-year-old African-American man, forcing him to stop. At the same moment, another member of the group, with an arrogant expression, bent down and spat on his shoes, performing the act so quickly that it left the witnesses in uncomfortable silence, revealing a calculated provocation. Despite the humiliation, the man maintained his composure. He avoided the obstacle with clenched jaw and a fixed stare, and continued walking with firm steps, making it clear that his determination surpassed the offense. A few meters away, a 40-year-old security guard observed the scene from a strategic position. His silence and evident inaction added an unsettling nuance, as the gazes of those present filled with expectation. As the African-American man walked away, one of the teenagers, his face reddened with fury, exchanged a threatening glance with his companions. At that moment, the atmosphere seemed to freeze. Each look, even the security guards, hinted that the humiliation was not over. The security guards began to move, walking down the halls with firm steps to approach the group of teenagers. Their serious and coordinated faces made it clear that the protocol to restore order was already in motion. Upon noticing the guards advance, the teenagers abruptly changed direction and headed toward the parking lot, quickening their pace to avoid a confrontation. Their gestures and glances mixed nervousness and defiance as they stuck together. In the parking lot, the group spotted Eli standing next to a car, waiting for his mother, absorbed in his thoughts. Without saying a word, they started pointing at him, laughing derisively and throwing insults that shattered the calm of the place. The afternoon light highlighted each gesture, intensifying the child's vulnerability amidst the growing tension. As the situation unfolded, some customers and employees in the parking lot stopped to watch, showing faces of increasing unease. A woman leaving a car frowned at the scene, while a young man discreetly stepped aside to record with his phone. Suddenly, an elderly man, with a furrowed brow and a determined look, stepped forward. His silent and defiant gesture made the teenagers stop for a brief moment and exchange nervous glances. The tension was such that any movement could trigger a drastic change in events. Eli stood in the parking lot, watching as the atmosphere became increasingly uncomfortable. His gaze, full of insecurity, wandered over the vehicles and the people passing by without noticing what was happening, as a tense silence spread around him. One of the teenagers leaned toward him with a disdainful smile and mockingly said, "What's this little black guy doing here all alone?" The cruel and humiliating clarity of his words made Eli's heart race. Without warning, another of the young men stepped forward and, with a sharp motion, snatched Eli's cap, throwing it forcefully into a corner of the parking lot. The action was so quick that Eli barely had time to react before noticing the loss of such a personal item. As the laughter and derisive comments mixed with the murmurs of the onlookers, some people in the parking lot stopped to watch the scene. An older man, stepping out of his car, frowned, while others, with phones in hand, recorded every moment. The tension was such that every second stretched the suspense, with no one intervening. With a pale face and his eyes fixed on the place where his cap had fallen, Eli felt how the discomfort turned into growing anxiety. His trembling hands clutched his clothes as he searched, in vain, for any sign of help among the crowd. The situation seemed to promise that something even bigger was about to happen. In the middle of the parking lot, the atmosphere becomes dense and silent. With his gaze fixed on the lost cap, Eli moves cautiously, only to discover that the teenagers have formed a deliberate barrier that blocks his path. His determination is overshadowed by the growing uncertainty. The group stays united, blocking Eli's path with fixed gestures and stares. Those present show concern and anticipation as the boy, trying to approach the cap without provoking a confrontation, is forced to retreat. In the midst of the tension, one of the teenagers steps forward and, with a slight shove, halts Eli's progress. The contact, subtle but forceful, sends a clear message. You lost your cap, and you'll only get it back by going through us. A few meters away, the security guard watches the scene with a cold and detailed attention. His upright posture and fixed gaze on the group suggest that he has noticed every movement, but his inaction is palpable to everyone present. His inaction intensifies Eli's vulnerability and reinforces the unease in the atmosphere. Silence extends as the crowd gathers, with faces of confusion. The blockade remains, and each glance toward Eli and the guard increases the anticipation. The air seems to promise that at any moment, Something will change the course of the situation. From a dark corner of the parking lot, a silhouette silently watches the scene, intensifying the feeling that, at any moment, the balance could be broken. About 15 meters away, Michael Jordan watches the scene with a fixed and analytical gaze. His face reflects absolute concentration as he registers every gesture of the teenagers and every reaction from the surroundings, silently evaluating the gravity of the situation. In that moment, Michael stopped, overwhelmed by an inevitable memory. When, as a child, he witnessed how a peer just a little older than him was cruelly ridiculed for the color of his skin. The image of his peer with silent tears and a humiliated face was etched into his soul. Now, seeing that reflection of vulnerability in another child, Michael knew he could no longer stay silent. It was time to break the cycle of injustice. With firm and determined steps, Michael moves toward the group, making it clear that he will not wait for the situation to worsen. The nearby customers perceive his determination, and several gazes turn toward him, filled with the hope that his presence will alter the course of events. As he approaches, the atmosphere thickens, and the forced laughter stops. Faces turn toward him, and Michael's seriousness contrasts with the carefree attitude they had shown moments earlier. One of the young men recognizes Michael Jordan in the imposing figure of 198 centimeters, and, with a barely audible voice, whispers something to his companions. His anxious tone and fearful gaze reveal that Michael's imminent presence has altered the group's confidence. With each step, the tension increases, and the distance between Michael and the group decreases. The teenagers look at each other. Their leader remains silent, assessing the situation. The atmosphere remains unstable, leaving everyone with the feeling that at any moment, the situation could take an unexpected turn. Michael immediately steps in between the boy and the teenagers, adopting an upright and firm posture that imposes both a physical and emotional barrier. His mere presence draws the attention of everyone, conveying protection and authority without words, making it clear that no aggression will go unanswered. Without hesitation, Michael firmly and decisively asks, "What are you doing?" The question cuts through the air, and in an instant, the teenagers are paralyzed. Their gazes cross, and the silence becomes deafening, revealing their surprise and confusion at his intervention. At that moment, the atmosphere is charged with a palpable expectation. Michael holds his ground firmly, watching the group's reactions carefully, while the crowd watches, holding its breath, waiting for the next turn in the situation. One of the teenagers, attempting to lighten the tension, forces a smile and cracks a joke that sounds empty, disconnected from the reality of the moment. In response to this attempt, Michael remains still, his gaze fixed on the aggressor. His face reflects absolute determination, and his posture conveys a clear message. No mockery that contributes to the humiliation of the boy will be tolerated. The firmness in his eyes leaves no room for interpretation or distraction, imposing a deep silence in the atmosphere. As the scene unfolds, the tension grows. People in the parking lot stop and gather to watch. Their faces reflect concern and anticipation, and some move closer, aware that they are witnessing a decisive moment. Among the crowd, a mall employee stops, holding his phone. He watches the scene, alternating his gaze between Michael and the defiant group. Each second reinforces the gravity of the moment. Michael remains unaltered, his gaze fixed, while the tension grows with each exchanged glance. The scene is suspended, leaving everyone with the feeling that any movement could change everything. One of the teenagers, with a trembling voice and a forced smile, mutters through his teeth, "It's just a joke," trying to minimize what happened. In response, Michael steps forward and, without raising his voice, replies firmly, "Respect is not a joke." His tone, unyielding, makes it clear that no humiliation will be tolerated. In response to Michael's words, the teenagers begin to look around, showing signs of discomfort. The group, which until that moment had shown a defiant attitude, is now enveloped in a silence thick with tension. The atmosphere becomes even denser with the presence of several people who, attracted by the intensity of the exchange, discreetly gather to observe the scene. A mall employee approaches slowly, phone in hand, recording every gesture. The gazes of the spectators fall on the group, increasing the pressure on the teenagers and making every word and every silence feel even more significant. At that moment, while the silence weighed heavily, Eli was left alone with his thoughts. He remembered the times he felt small and helpless, and wondered if he would always be afraid. But in the midst of that uncertainty, a spark of courage ignited, the hope that, with Michael by his side, he could regain his voice and dignity. The teenagers, now visibly unsure, try to find a way out or a way to justify their actions. But Michael's firmness prevents any attempt to reconcile the situation with mere laughter or excuses. The crowd reacts by taking out their phones to record every gesture, capturing the charged atmosphere and the growing murmur as the gazes focus on Michael and the group's response. The teenagers begin to slowly retreat, their steps becoming measured, and their faces reflect fear and confusion as they move farther away from both the boy and Michael's imposing figure. As the teenagers retreat, one of them stops and, with trembling hands, extends the cap that had been taken from the boy. Eli watches the scene with uncertainty, surrounded by a silent crowd that, with fixed gazes and cameras in hand, confirms that the conflict has crossed an undeniable line, reinforced by Michael's unshakable presence. The teenagers glance at each other, unsure and with the weight of their actions evident in every gesture, while the atmosphere thickens, hinting that every second could change the course of the situation. While the tension still lingered in the air, Michael remained still, his eyes scanning the faces of the teenagers who were slowly withdrawing. For a moment, his mind was filled with a silent unease. He remembered every look of disdain and every silent scream he had witnessed over the years. That reflection convinced him that even if the group retreated today, the real change would begin in how everyone, including himself, would face injustice. When the group had moved far enough, Michael crouched to approach Eli, making a gesture that combined firmness with tenderness. His voice, calm yet laden with authority, broke the silence as he asked, "Are you okay?" Eli nodded slightly, although his eyes betrayed a lingering unease. His body was still trembling, and every movement revealed the mark of recent fear. Despite the nod, the silence surrounding him was a testament to the internal tension that still hadn't fully dissipated. Eli's mother appeared through the crowd with quick steps and a visibly worried face, making her way toward the spot where the tension was concentrated. As she approached, she raised her voice urgently. "What happened here?" while her eyes scanned the parking lot in search of answers. Her arrival intensified the atmosphere. Silence took over the crowd, and uneasy looks showed that every gesture was taking on greater meaning amid the confusion. Michael, maintaining composure and keeping his gaze fixed on her, took a step forward to approach and respond to her question, briefly and precisely explaining what had happened. The necessary intervention to stop the bullying of Eli by the teenagers and the disrespectful behavior that had marked the situation. Upon hearing the explanation, the mother's face hardened and her brows furrowed in disapproval. The annoyance was reflected in every line of her expression, and although her words remained silent, the gleam in her eyes made it clear that she was deeply affected by what had happened. Without hesitation, the mother immediately leaned toward Eli and hugged him tightly. In that gesture, full of protection and comfort, the determination to ensure her son's safety was evident. The embrace lasted in a silence charged with emotions, hinting that, despite the apparent calm, the situation still had the potential to trigger greater consequences. As she slowly pulled away, the mother lifted her gaze and, in a soft but sincere voice, said, "Thank you for being here for him." Michael, maintaining composure, nodded and responded seriously, "It's my duty. I will always be here to protect what is right." In that brief exchange, their gazes met, reflecting relief, sorrow, and the unspoken understanding of the shared responsibility in that decisive moment. After the initial exchange, the mother lowered her gaze and confessed quietly, "Michael, I deeply admire you. Your way of acting, your commitment. I wish Eli shared that passion. Sometimes it hurts me to see that he still doesn't care about sports, especially basketball, which teaches so much about teamwork and discipline." Michael gave a knowing smile and replied, "If Eli ever shows interest, I'll gladly put him in touch with an excellent coach. I'm sure he'll discover in basketball a way to express himself and grow." With those words, a silent agreement was made, a promise of support for a future where passion and self-improvement could light Eli's path. The teenagers quickly moved away from the scene, walking with hurried steps and tense faces, clearly upset by what had happened. Their gazes avoided meeting each other, and the murmur of their conversations became almost imperceptible as they tried to distance themselves from the charged atmosphere they had left behind. In the midst of the retreat, one of them briefly stopped and, speaking in a low tone so only his companions could hear, stated that it was an exaggeration and that they were just playing, trying to justify the group's behavior with a statement that sought to diminish the seriousness of the moment. Hours later, in a completely different atmosphere from the chaotic one of the moment, one of the teenagers took out his mobile phone and uploaded a video to social media. The recording showed the episode superficially, focusing on fragments of the incident and mocking comments, while canned laughter played in contrast to the seriousness of what had happened. The post, accompanied by descriptions that downplayed the bullying, began to circulate rapidly among users. The video spread quickly, and in every online comment, the division between those who were shocked and those who openly criticized the group's attitude was noticeable. The recording began to spread quickly on social media, reaching thousands of views in a matter of hours. The video was shared across multiple platforms, and notifications of likes and comments kept accumulating. The scene of the incident became a discussion point for hundreds of users, some outraged by what had happened, others pointing out the importance of justice being served. The impact grew even more when journalists and influential figures started talking about the case. News portals replicated the story, and hashtags related to the incident became a trend. In no time, the conversation had transcended the digital realm and reached traditional media. Among the users, outrage turned into action. Every frame of the video was analyzed, identifying details such as uniforms, backpacks, and other distinctive features of the aggressors. It wasn't long before their names and schools began circulating on social media. Some justified this public exposure, while others warned about the consequences of mass scrutiny on the internet. A parallel debate erupted. "Is it right to expose teenagers like this?" wrote an influential user on Twitter. The post quickly filled with divided responses. Some argued that actions have consequences, while others warned about the danger of exposing minors on social media. Each new post about the identities of the youths added fuel to the fire of a discussion that seemed to have no end. As the information spread, the pressure on the teenagers increased. Their social media accounts were flooded with comments demanding explanations and apologies. The online conversation became more and more intense, and everything indicated that the repercussions would not be long in coming. The first blow came when one of the teenagers checked his phone and found dozens of mentions on his social media. Upon opening a post with thousands of comments, his face tensed. "Is this one of them?" read a message, accompanied by a screenshot of the video. His sweaty hand slid the screen down, reading responses full of anger. "Coward. Disgrace of a person. What will you do now?" The boy swallowed and blocked the screen with a trembling click. In the first hours after the video was posted, social media flooded with forceful messages. The teenagers' profiles received a deluge of criticism in the form of direct comments and posts that unreservedly denounced what had happened. In his room, with the light from his phone reflecting on his face, Ryan refreshed the screen over and over. His name was everywhere. Someone had found his address. His address. He felt his chest tighten, his heartbeats in his ears. He wanted to write something, delete his account, but his hands were shaking too much to type. "Do you want to ruin my life?" his father shouted, throwing the phone onto the bed. "Do you know who just called me? My boss. My damn boss." His son curled up on the bed, unsure of what to say. "You have two options," his father continued with a tense jaw. "Either you fix this right now, or you forget about ever touching a screen again in your life." The intensity of the messages was noticeable. Users of various ages and backgrounds wrote in detail, demanding explanations and holding accountable those who had participated in the incident. Soon after, the address of the school the teenagers attended issued an official rejection statement. The message, broadcast on the institution's website and social media, strongly condemned any form of disrespectful and discriminatory behavior and announced that disciplinary measures would be taken accordingly. Alongside this institutional response, the teenagers' families began receiving a large number of calls from the press. The phones rang incessantly, and each conversation revealed the media impact of the incident. One father, with a trembling voice, pleaded with a journalist to stop calling. Another yelled at his son to turn off all his social media. Some were desperately seeking a lawyer. No one knew what to do. In a meeting room at the school, the parents of one of the teenagers were present alongside a group of teachers and administrators. With a firm voice and without hesitation, they demanded that their son publicly apologize for his behavior. The young man, with his shoulders hunched and his gaze fixed on the floor, felt the weight of all the stares digging into his back. He hesitated for a moment before murmuring an almost inaudible "I'm sorry." A murmur spread across the room. Some students exchanged skeptical glances. Others checked their phones, verifying if anyone was already recording. A teacher cleared his throat, implying that he expected something more. The voice of his father rose sharply, louder. The teenager swallowed and repeated, this time with more volume, but without conviction. His hands were sweaty. In his mind, there was only one question: will this ever end? A few blocks away, in the privacy of his room, another of the teenagers drummed his fingers on his desk. On the screen, notifications kept appearing. Insults, threats, messages from former friends who now avoided him. He took a breath and began to erase his online presence. First Twitter, then Instagram. When he reached his last account, he hesitated. What if I apologize? His eyes scanned the comments one last time. There was no space for explanations. With one final click, his face disappeared from the digital world. But the feeling of relief never came. The act, performed with precise movements, revealed his attempt to evade the imminent exposure and punishment of an unforgiving public opinion. Meanwhile, the story had transcended digital borders and reached the screens of a well-known national media outlet. In a news studio, a reporter narrated the events in detail, showing images of the incident and presenting statements from both witnesses and experts on social coexistence. In a television studio, Michael B. Jordan sits in front of the camera with a focused look and an upright posture. During the interview, he answers incisive questions about the incident with clear and decisive words, emphasizing the importance of confronting racism in every situation. The interviewer stares at him and asks the question everyone was waiting for. Michael, some say that intervening in these situations only makes the problem worse. What would you say to that? Michael maintains a firm gaze. He leans slightly forward. The problem is not intervening. The problem is staying silent. If we all look the other way, racism keeps winning. The interviewer listens attentively, and the images accompanying the broadcast reinforce the seriousness of the message, connecting the recent past with a vision of imminent change. At the same time, in Eli's home, the family receives a flood of supportive messages. The mother and father are surrounded by notifications on their phones and computers, where strangers and friends express solidarity and empathy. Among the dozens of supportive messages, Eli's mother stops at one that makes her skin crawl. You should have taught your son not to cause trouble. You wouldn't be in this situation if he knew his place. A chill runs down her spine. She looks at her husband, who clenches his fists. Not everyone is on our side, she whispers. Eli slid his finger across the screen until a message caught his attention. Eli, I don't know you, but I was bullied when I was your age. Today, I'm a lawyer and I help kids like you. Never let them make you feel less. The boy swallowed. He felt a lump in his throat. For the first time in days, he smiled. The institutional reaction doesn't take long. Based on the recordings and evidence gathered, an official statement emphasizes that safety and respect for clients are non-negotiable, and the decision quickly spreads among employees and visitors, setting a clear precedent in the management of responsibility. The guard looked at the document in front of him. His name, in bold, followed by a single word: termination. I can't lose this job, he muttered, feeling cold sweat on the back of his neck. His supervisor looked at him seriously. You had the chance to do something. You didn't. The guard stands up from his chair in the security office, his face red. It wasn't my job to get involved in fights. I just follow orders. His supervisor crosses his arms. Your job was to keep this place safe. You didn't. The guard grits his teeth, but has no response. The silence in the room weighed more than any word. The community forum organized at the local cultural center was packed. On social media, hundreds of people commented in real time. Eli's case had transcended his personal story and now symbolized a much larger struggle. It was about dignity, equality, and the urgent need to change what had been ignored for years. Javier Morales, with his face marked by the intensity of the moment, took the microphone. He looked at his audience and let the silence settle for a few seconds. Then, with a firm voice, he began. This is not just Eli's case. It's the case of every child who has been humiliated, of every person who has been ignored, of every victim who has been forgotten. And the worst part is that it's not new. It's the same story that repeats itself over and over. How long will this go on? A murmur spread through the room. Some nodded, others lowered their gaze. Javier's words hit where it hurt. Every person here has seen something similar and has looked the other way. We can't allow that anymore. Every act of discrimination is an opportunity to change the rules of the game, to demand real justice. The forum became the epicenter of a wave of change. On social media, hundreds of people shared personal stories about similar incidents. A group of activists organized a march in front of the town hall, demanding answers from the authorities. Neighbors in the area created an online petition demanding new measures against discrimination in public spaces. That night, in a corner of the neighborhood, someone painted graffiti on a forgotten wall. It read, "It's not just Eli. It's all of us." It didn't appear on the news. There were no speeches or big headlines. But the next morning, someone else added underneath, in hurried handwriting, "And we won't stay silent." If this story moved you, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss more inspiring content. Share this video with friends and family who need to see stories that challenge perspectives and leave an indelible mark. Explore our channel to discover stories that inspire and transform. Until the next video. Days later, the image of the wall began circulating on social media. Not with millions of shares, nor with big influencers talking about it. Just real people telling real stories. And little by little, without the need for a big march or banners, something changed. People began to face what they had previously preferred to ignore. And for Eli, that meant everything.